I was in the chamber and heard Senator Sanders' speech, and I appreciate his passion about globalization and what he and it brought back, and I spoke to him after he spoke, it brought back to me the memories of standing shoulder to shoulder. He in his second term, I in my first, against the North American Free Trade Agreement, and then a few years later standing shoulder to shoulder with him in opposition to PNTR, Permanent Normal Trade Relations with China. And we know what that meant, especially in my state, and especially in the industrial Midwest, especially in places that the presiding officer represents, in places like East St. Louis and downstate Illinois, and so much of the industrial plants that were steel, especially east of Chicago and Indiana and Illinois. Madam President, we are on the verge of a big win for Ohio, a win that will create jobs, will bring down prices, will bring home supply chains. As a kid growing up in Ohio, I walked the halls of Johnny Appleseed Junior High School with the sons and daughters of union workers, electricians, electrical workers at Westinghouse, sons and daughters of auto workers from General Motors, and machinists from Ohio Brass, and carpenters and pipe fitters and electricians, and who built our city and serviced these large companies. But by the time I graduated Mansfield High School, from Mansfield Senior High School, those plants were shutting down one after another. Why? Because corporate America wanted cheap labor. First, they went to anti-union states in the South. A plant might shut down in Mansfield or Barberton, Ohio, and move to Alabama. A plant might shut down in Shelby, Ohio, or Springfield, Ohio, and move to Georgia. A plant might shut down in Toledo or in Wadsworth, Ohio, and move to North Carolina or Arkansas or Virginia. They went to anti-union states. They went to anti-union states with low wages. But you know what? Then those CEOs, all paying themselves really, really good income, raising, you could see already then the average pay for a worker. In those days, when I was, I guess, in junior high school, a CEO made about, the plant manager made about 25 times what the worker made, or even a smaller proportion of that. Now, it's hundreds of times what workers made, because 25 times what workers made just wasn't enough for a lot of these companies. So then they shut down a lot of these factories in the anti-union right-to-work South, and they moved to Mexico. They wanted NAFTA to pass, North American Free Trade Agreement, so they could do it. They wanted PNTR, Permanent Normal Trade Relations with China, to pass so they could go to China. Always in the name of efficiency. Always in the name, we just got to be more efficient. Always in the name of efficiency. That, as you know, Madam President, efficiency is business school speak for pay our workers less. Those CEOs, and some of you remember these nicknames, these CEOs earned the names of Chainsaw Al, and John the Cutter, and Larry the Knife, and Neutron Jack. Now those, to the CEOs themselves, they may kind of like those names, but they were not bestowed on them because out of respect. They were given those nicknames because they were willing always to cut the pay of workers in Mansfield, Ohio, and hurt those families and partially destroy those communities. They were always willing to do that. So their companies made more money, and they got bigger paychecks, and all the executives in the corporate suites all did much, much better. The workers didn't, the communities didn't, but who really cared? They lobbied Congress to make outsourcing easier, and politicians were all too happy to do their bidding. First with NAFTA, as I said, then permanent trade relations with China. That transformation hollowed out manufacturing in Ohio and parts of the presiding officer's state in Illinois, throughout the Midwest. And then here's where it hits us most poignantly in our face today. Ended up with too long, too fragile supply chains that stretched all over the world. So first, my friends' families, my friends' parents lost their jobs and ended up in jobs making, a third less or half less. But now, and the communities were never really, many of these communities never really recovered, these proud communities. But now, today, everyone's paying for those decisions to go overseas and to shut plants in Ohio and in the United States and go overseas. Now everyone's paying with higher prices. Why? A big reason for the inflation we see today is decades of offshoring our supply chains. We need to bring that production back home. That's the point that's what this bill is all about. Investing more in America, making more in America, particularly the most critical inputs that cause the most problems right now, like semiconductors. And think about that. Think about these American companies. They have American, they were founded in America. The investment, the research was done in America. But think about this technology that started in this country, was probably patented in this country, was developed by Americans or immigrants to our country, but got tax incentives from our country, but then these companies began to move offshore. And today, semiconductors invented in the United States, 90% of them are made overseas. We only make 10% of semiconductors in this country. Yet, we make 10% of semiconductors, but we make 0% of the highest end semiconductors. Because these companies all thought, well, there's more profits overseas. That's the hand we're dealt now. So over the past year, Ohio manufacturers have faced severe shortages and long waits for semiconductors. Ford and GM plants in Ohio forced to implement short-term plant closures because of chip shortages. Ohio manufacturers rely on semiconductors. They all suffer when there's a shortage. Let me just list some of these companies. I believe I've been in every one of these factories or these companies. Ford in Lime, Ohio. Ford in a city just like Mansfield where I grew up. Ford in Avon Lake. I used to live 3 miles from that plant. Jeep in Toledo. My wife and I drive a Jeep made in America with union workers. Navistar in Springfield. Whirlpool in Clyde. I've been to that plant maybe 5 or 6 times, fought alongside them on enforcing trade rules. Kenworth in Chillicothe. GE in Evendale near Cincinnati. Steris in Mentor. Nucor in Marion. ArcelorMittal in Cleveland. Cleveland Cliffs in Toledo and Coshocton, right across the river from Steubenville in Weirton, West Virginia. Half the workers there are Ohioans. These businesses and their workers need chips. The U.S. invented the semiconductor. We started the industry, 90% made overseas. We allowed that to happen because of the corruption of this place, where people were happy to vote to give tax breaks to companies to move overseas. For whatever reason, too many presidents from Trump all the way back to Clinton went along with those corporate interests as those companies betrayed us and move overseas. What does that mean today? It means higher prices, it means back orders, and it means we're all paying too much for too many products. The CHIPS Act is about reshoring those supply chains, investing in Ohio manufacturing, bringing down prices for every American. It's not enough to invent technology here. We've seen it over and over. Take a look at the label on a phone, on any smartphone. It probably says developed in California, made in China. Developed in California. That means the invention was in California, the research was in California, with U.S. investment of tax dollars, one way or the other. But then they made it in China. Why? Because they wanted cheap labor and they could make more money by making it in China. Now they raise the price because the supply chain spread all over the world. So we get tech jobs in Silicon Valley, but not the production jobs we need throughout the country. Because frankly, people on the coast don't think a lot about what's happening in the internal part of the country. And that's not good enough. Our national security, our economic competitiveness depend on having a vibrant domestic manufacturing sector, not just a tech development sector in the coast. When you outsource production, you outsource innovation along with it. We keep doing this. It's not like these companies where the production's happening are stupid people. These are smart people too, and they're going to take our inventions and our innovation, because we know so much of innovation takes place in the shop floor, they're going to pass us with their brain power and their innovation and their inventions. Ohioans know that ideas and improvements come directly from the shop floor. That's why we were so good at it in the 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s. It's why this bill invests in our greatest asset, American innovation, American workers. It allows Intel to move forward in Columbus, 10,000 good-paying jobs up and down the supply chain. It's how we do, this historic investment is going to impact far more than just Central Ohio. When you establish an industry like this, it has ripple effects around the state, around the region, around the country. It's not just these jobs, it's the way they attract other suppliers. They incubate talent that in turn attracts other business, the way it used to be in our country. It's just the beginning. We'll see a lot more companies and create a lot more jobs. Ohioans know how to make things. We know what that means. For our country, it's a decision to invest in American ingenuity, American workers, American communities. It's a big win for Ohio. It's a big win for the industrial Midwest. It's a big win for our country. It's what I've been fighting for my whole career, good-paying jobs. When you love this country, you fight for the people that make it work. More manufacturing innovation, more technology stamped, made in Ohio. It's how we bury the term Rust Belt.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.